Hey, stay safe. Good to see you. Give it another 30 seconds to get people online. Nice to see you, Satsria. Cal, stay safe. Nice to see you as always. Right, I think we're almost ready to go. Right, let's get underway then. Hello, and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we're going to take another look at the recent Delhi protests as more shocking information emerges, including state-sanctioned crackdowns against CJP marchers that featured not just pellet guns, but actual live rifle fire. And yes, yet more online propaganda to demonize the protesters. And if Sikhs need any more reason to support the concept of Khalistan, well, the Indian Supreme Court has just made a landmark ruling on caste identity and conversion, which now basically morally obliges anybody who's a Sikh to reject Indian governance. And talking of India, I didn't know the nation that boasts a world-leading space program also has to issue ration cards to feed its starving. Thank you to one of our commenters who alerted me to this. Millions of ration cards. Well, we'll highlight that growing wealth gap in India that really cries out for a new nation to emerge, a nation founded on, of course, the principles of reducing that very wealth gap. Anyway, in the meantime, here in the UK, Prime Minister Andy Burnham's cabinet reshuffle has reshaped diaspora representation here in the UK, and it's now raising critical questions about whether new appointments will champion Panthic rights, or is it going to succumb to party loyalism, as it always has done? And finally, from the Quad Summit in Manila over in the Philippines to rising referendum mobilization across North America, we're going to track the global fight for Sikh self-determination and, of course, civil liberties. All this and loads more on today's show, as always. So do stay tuned until the end of the show, of course, when, of course, I'm going to be showing you loads of comments which filled up beneath the videos from last week. So do stay tuned for that. Right. Okay, let's get underway. Amrik, good day to you. Nice to see you're online as well. So thanks for joining us. And of course, anybody else who's there, do feel free to pop any thoughts in the comments, and I'll try and pick up your comments as I talk today. So you'll have to, if you can hear a thundering in the background, unfortunately, I've got the United States Air Force for some reason practicing overhead. Don't ask me why, but they do that periodically, and it does make my table rattle. So apologies if you can pick that up. Anyway, let's get underway. And as usual, loads to get through today. Yeah, it is indeed. Of course, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the protests from the last few days, because, of course, as the days have passed, a little bit more information is sort of quietly but slowly but surely slipping out through social media. And now, of course, the mainstream media is just starting to pick up on it, what really has happened on the streets. It usually does take a few days for the truth to sort of filter out, certainly to the wider world. So, of course, it does, as usual, point to this mask of democracy and democratic restraint that is, as always, slipping a little in India, to put it mildly. And, of course, revealing that heavy-handed authoritarian apparatus that underlies that current Modi administration. Now, over the past week or so, the streets surrounding Jantar Mantar in New Delhi, and Parliament Street particularly, have actually turned into a bit of a battleground. It's a bit hard to sort of to ignore. And what began as a massive youth and citizen-led movement under the banner of the CJP, that's that cockroach Janata Party, they were demanding fundamental systemic accountability and an end to those paper leaks, exam paper leaks. And of course, the immediate resignation of the Education Minister, Dharmendra Pradhan, that has met the brute force of the Indian state. Here we go again, it's sad to say. In other words, it's same old, same old. So according to a lot more details filtering out from those protests, and of course loads of the sort of the non-mainstream outlets are now putting together their sort of editorial take. And as they also pick up information, the Caravan is a prime example. They've picked up on this as well. They've got a great article on this. They're starting just to see what really happened on the ground. And the Sansad Chale March, the CJP march, saw tens of thousands of citizens marching toward Parliament. But of course, rather than engaging any sort of civil dialogue, those security forces that they met responded with, as usual, unyielding repression. They used tear gas, they used heavy lathi charges, those wooden batons, those wooden sticks, and worse, basically indiscriminate violence that was totally unleashed upon demonstrators. And I would urge you to watch my podcast also with Dr. Graham at the end of this week. We are going to talk about this, and in the context of that, discuss how India cannot claim itself to be a democracy, but instead a colonially ruled nation still, no different to when the British ruled it. And in fact, arguably, it could even be argued it's worse than the British, because at least the British weren't corrupt. They were colonial controllers, but at least that regime wasn't corrupt. India is a colonial regime, but it's also corrupt. So it's almost like a double whammy. Anyway, so back to this specifically. So, and thank you to the Caravan for picking up all this information, because they found official documents, and this is one of them actually, which confirmed what the state attempted to deny. That Rapid Action Force, basically the police force on the ground, under direct police orders, deployed pump-action shotguns firing plastic kinetic pellets directly at the crowds. These things are vicious. These things are deeply, deeply dangerous. Let me show you why. There's one victim. If you can't read this, I'll just quickly. This is a hospital medical report. This is an official medical report signed by Dr. Mona Agarwal, and she has said physical assault at Jantar Mantar by pellet gun. Then talks about the actual injuries to arms and chest and back, multiple foreign bodies, basically all around the body. And that is the physical manifestation of it. I mean, this guy was a democratic protester. And look at the state of him now. I mean, you have to look at images. And there are loads of images like this circulating. A lot of them coming from the hospitals themselves. Multiple young protesters, including this guy, I think he's a 19-year-old, Sahil Lochap, and a 25-year-old, somebody called Sheikh Irshad Mansouri. They were hit at point-blank range with these pellet guns. These things are deeply dangerous. And this guy suffered multiple pellets lodged all over his body, as that medical report stated officially. And, well, as I say, just look at the photo, to see. But not just that, broken bones. And actually, if you look closely at this image, this is his X-ray, that guy's X-ray of his leg. His leg is peppered with pellets. Again, democratic protest. Can you imagine, for those of us living here in the West, obviously I'm in the UK, you guys in North America, you guys in Australia, down under Europe, can you imagine going out to a protest and coming home with a leg full of shot like that? How would you feel? We take our democracy for granted. India is supposed to be a democracy. Yet, look at that. That's what happened when you protest in so-called democratic India. It's an absolute outrage. I mean, you have to be pretty clear what this represents. The deployment of pellet guns, and these are weapons that are historically reserved for crushing dissent in occupied Kashmir, for example, or actually even during the historic farmers' protests, outrageously so, now being brought directly into the streets of New Delhi, the capital, against unarmed, peaceful youngsters. I mean, to say it's shocking is an understatement, but it gets worse. Just when you think it couldn't get any worse, it does. For those of you who are on social media on a regular basis, it's quite likely you will have seen this. This guy coming into shot, wait for it, an AK-47, a Kalashnikov, 5.56 caliber, I think it is, Kalashnikov. This is a high velocity, high caliber automatic weapon. This video footage. It was captured near the protest perimeter. And it is this uniformed law enforcement officer, apparently it's from Bihar, this guy, is brandishing an AK-47 automatic assault rifle. I mean, yeah, why are they using an AK? It is just absolutely unbelievable. He raises the barrel into the air and he fires apparently 4 live rounds over the heads of the protesters. I mean, who in their right mind in the first place brings an AK-47 to a protest in the first place and with live rounds in the magazine? It is just unbelievable. I mean, think about the recklessness of discharging live automatic military fire in a dense urban protest zone. This isn't crowd control, it's deliberate state-sanctioned intimidation with lethal force designed to terrorize the public into submission. Again, this is not a democracy. Now, in response to this extreme brutality, and this guy apparently has been at least suspended, but I mean, that's the least of it. Why was his senior officers allowing him, even within 100 miles of this protest, bearing a Kalashnikov? But anyway, legal action groups, civil rights advocates are mobilizing massively now to take police authorities directly to court, and petitions have been filed right across India, actually, but particularly with the Supreme Court demanding an absolute ban, firstly on those pellet guns, kinetic pellet projectiles as they're called, and calling for accountability for non-uniformed, unbadged officers caught on camera assaulting demonstrators. I mean, that's the least of it, obviously. AK versus AK is fair in India, Mr. 403 comes up. Well, I would ask, where were the AKs being carried by the protesters? Even if the protesters were carrying sticks or iron bars, which they weren't, but say they were, does that justify carrying an AK-47? I didn't see any AK-47s. It's unbelievable. But anyway, ultimately, though, you cannot have in a democracy armed police officers in an urban environment, at an urban democratic protest, bringing live rounds, particularly with an AK-47. It just does not compute with democracies. Now, for the Sikh community and, of course, other minoritized groups across India, these scenes are just a simple, familiar, grim echo. What we're witnessing on the streets of Delhi is the same playbook deployed by Indian security apparatuses for the last 40 years. Total immunity, complete disregard for human life, and essentially worse, the militarization of civilian policing. Again, when you militarize a police force, it takes it from being a democratic force in a democratic nation to an authoritarian regime like North Korea, like the Soviet Union, like China. But India is becoming these sorts of countries. That is unfortunately what India's facing. It's shocking. And sadly, when we see this, you've got to ask some very serious questions. Because again, it does bring back memories and resonances of 1980s and 1990s Punjab, those crackdowns. So the structural reality of India has not changed. This is the key point. I made it in yesterday's show. India just has not changed from the 1980s and 1990s. It's shocking. But still, as this state violence escalates, so too, of course, and it's not just on the streets, it is the mainstream propaganda. They're at it as well. And this was an interesting one I picked up. And of course, it's very predictable. State-aligned media channels and right-wing commentators, the Hindu IT cells, they've all seized upon a new, fresh line of attack to reframe the narrative. The focus suddenly shifted to visuals of a female police officer. Now, believe this or not, she is 4 months pregnant. She was present on those volatile front lines during the protests. Pro-government outlets are using her presence to spin this calculated victimhood campaign, painting the demonstrators as violent and evil. They're violent, evil aggressors, targeting vulnerable personnel. Look at this poor pregnant woman. I mean, again, I have to sort of pause and say, seriously? It does raise a critical, alarming question. Why on earth was a visibly pregnant police officer deployed to the barricades of an escalating high-tension mass protest in the first place. Now, standard police operational procedure strictly prohibits placing pregnant women in unpredictable crowd control environments for obvious reasons. Who in their right mind put a pregnant woman, 4 months pregnant, on the front line? Again, you have to ask the question, was her placement deliberate? Was it a cynical maneuver by police commanders to engineer this propaganda opportunity? Putting a pregnant officer in harm's way, the authorities, at least on the face of it, now appear to have manufactured a pre-packaged talking point for the Hindenburg ecosystem. It's actually a classic tactical maneuver to try and reverse the dynamic, to deflect attention from that police brutality, ignoring officers bearing AK-47s, and recast the police force as the victim, and then demonizing the youngsters standing up for their basic human rights. And rather than answering for systemic violence, the regime instead is leveraging situations like this. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. There you go. Sorry, I forgot to press the right button. There you go. There she is. Apologies for not showing you that earlier. So again, instead of answering for systemic violence, instead of answering for their brutality in that democratic protest, the regime leverages this to try and moralize, to weaponize public sympathy, and then justify, of course, an even harsher crackdown. It is shocking beyond belief. It's shocking if it was not deliberate, then the incompetence in itself is shocking, to place this poor young lady, 4 months pregnant, if indeed she genuinely is pregnant, to put her on the front line. But if it was cynical, if it was a deliberate ploy, then shame on them. But of course, despite the state spin, the spirit of organic interfaith solidarity that was present in these protests continues to break through, because there is actually, and I've touched on this before, there's an interesting sort of spin on all this. Lots of photos, of course, emerging now after the event. This is a wonderful moment. It's a really powerful moment captured at those barricades. So in the middle of all that chaos, that anarchy, local Sikhs formed a human chain. They locked arms, as you can see here, to protect fellow demonstrators and stand as a physical shield between these unarmed youngsters and those lines of police batons, the pellet guns, and God forbid, more AK-47s. This is an act of selfless courage. And of course, it directly embodies the core Gurmat ethos of what's called, I understand, Vand Chako, and standing firmly against oppression, that basic fundamental philosophy of being a Sikh. I'm sorry, B Singh, I've just noticed your comment. Comment section again blocked in Punjab politics voice. Oh dear. So you're not allowed, is that another channel? You're not allowed to comment on it? Not good. Anyway, so back to this. Back to state overreach. And this is Punjab University, just to sort of go off on a slight tangent here. This is about, again, the resistance against this sort of state overreach up at Punjab University. We talked a lot about Punjab University. And indeed, we actually mentioned it in the podcast that I'll upload later this week with Dr. Graywell, this the attempts by the RSS to try and control the educational system, which of course is linked to these protests. These protests are about resisting the centralization of the education within India, because it's causing all sorts of problems like corrupt leakages and stuff. When you decentralize it, you don't get so many problems. Punjab University is a decentralized center of education, of course, a center of excellence for the Sikh faith and the Sikh and Punjabi people. And interestingly, student activists have achieved a huge victory. And it has been going on actually for the last few months, but apparently this week, administration officials have finally restored these Punjabi language nameplates right across the campus now. Apparently they're seen all over the campus now. And it is, of course, a direct blow to those centralizing attempts I was talking about, the Delhi's attempts to try and take full control of the education system in India for obvious reasons, but particularly targeting Punjab University because Punjab University is a centre that clearly could potentially foment revolt. In other words, there is a strong pro-Khalistan sentiment in Punjab University. So, of course, they're going to try and impose their control over it. But they've failed. They've received this direct blow. And they're now being forced to put the signs back up in Punjabi. So well done to the students up at the university. And also, because of what's been going on, Modi himself has had to take to the airwaves. This is quite a rare thing, actually. Modi rarely, I understand, very rarely gives, if at all, ever gives press conferences. And again, when we talk a lot about, is India a democracy, or is it just essentially a continuance of British colonial rule? A standard sign of any democratic nation is that its leaders are always held accountable to the press, to the people. Modi, technically elected, but then China has elections, Russia has elections, and those leaders rarely face press conferences, and Modi almost never faces genuine press conferences. So he cannot be asked those uncomfortable questions. I hark you back to recently, a couple of months ago, 3 months ago or so, when that lovely Norwegian lady, journalist, shouted a question to Modi when he stood up to talk with the Norwegian Prime Minister. She shouted at him a question about human rights. And what did he do? He ran out. He literally ran out of the room. Modi will not face a free press. Speaks for itself. Anyway, he has actually, I'll play it for you now. You can't hear the sound, but I'll talk about it anyway, just to give you, to be honest, it's not worth listening to anyway. But of course, he is facing huge outrage, this growing outrage. And of course, his public image is crumbling now in India. And so he's had to release this video message. And it's aimed specifically at Punjabis, interestingly. And it attempts to offer warm platitudes and soft rhetoric. It's all very predictable stuff. But ultimately, the diaspora and, of course, the people on the ground are wise to this. They see through this strategy. You know, you can't tweet pleasantries to Punjab with one hand, and then on the other, your police force fires pellet guns and assault rifles at the youngsters with the other. I mean, you know, it just doesn't work. So ultimately, let's continue talking about Narendra Modi's India. I want to look at India as a failing nation as well in this sort of next bit. I'm going to look at how the Indian legal framework, and we often talk about lawfare, the law being weaponized against the minorities, and particularly obviously the Sikh community. It all is also now being used to codify caste discrimination. And I want to expose a bit of economic reality behind India's global propaganda. And I'll refer to space programs and of course, as I said in the intro, food rationing, which is absolutely unbelievable. Yeah, this was an interesting ruling just a couple of days ago. Yesterday, in fact, it was reported. Here you go. It was a ruling by the Indian Supreme Court. And it is yet another example of why Khalistan is basically a necessity. Because in Khalistan, everyone, of course, will be treated as equals. And it just highlights this case, as I'll talk about in a moment, the specifics of it. It highlights why India is moving further and further away from the whole fundamental social foundations of Sikhi. They've always been separate, but that gulf has never been wider than it is today. And ultimately, it explains why Indian Sikhs, as well as obviously the diaspora Sikhs, must reject India through just simple moral obligation. So yesterday, the Supreme Court dismissed a review petition against a March ruling. It was a ruling back in March. It reaffirmed that any individual from a scheduled caste background who converts to a religion other than Hinduism, Sikhism, or Buddhism immediately and completely loses their scheduled caste status. And I'll explain what this means in simple terms in a moment. So the bench, the legal bench, as it's called, refused to grant an oral hearing, and they declared there was no error on the record But this decision locks in a legal construct that originates from, and it's all very dry legal stuff, but I'll give you the details just in case anybody's interested. Hi, TC, nice to see you joining us. It's from Clause 3 of the Constitution Scheduled Caste Order of 1950. Now, the original order applied strictly to Hindus. Later, it was amended to cover Sikhs in 1956 and Buddhists in 1990. However, the court ruled that conversion to Christianity or Islam results in the automatic and immediate termination of all constitutional protections, affirmative action entitlements, and statutory safeguards under the Prevention of Atrocities Act. Blah, blah, blah. So anyway, what does all that mean? So I'm just having a quick look at your comments. Bramleen Binder, welcome to the show. Nice to see you commenting as well. Okay, so what does all that legalese mean? Well, in simple terms, this ruling highlights the legal weaponization of caste identity by the state. So the judiciary's rationale relies on the assertion that religions like Christianity do not historically recognize caste, but in practice, social prejudice, systemic oppression doesn't disappear simply because you change your faith. So again, as a simple example, if you're a Dalit and you decide to convert to become a Christian or indeed a Muslim, you're still treated by everybody as lowest caste, as a Dalit. But this ruling means you lose your previously held constitutional protection. Because when you're a Hindu, you're seen legally and given as a protected class. So you have all sorts of protections under Indian law. Now, if you convert to Sikh or Buddhism, you still retain that protection under Indian law. But if you become a Christian or a Muslim, those protections are gone. How can that be right? How can that be fair? That's no equal society. And again, when I hark back to what I said at the earlier part of this story, this is why Sikh just diverges so far away from this. Because, of course, from Gurmat and Sikh philosophical perspectives, this idea presents a deep ideological contradiction. Sikhism was, of course, born from the very first guru as primarily anti-caste. It sprung up to reject the whole caste system originally. So the Sikh gurus explicitly rejected the Varna system. They brought in institutions of equality. Everything that was created by the gurus was founded on the simple principle of equality. Pangat, Sangat, all these institutions were based on everybody is equal. It's like Langar, everybody, no matter your background, your social standing, whatever, everybody in Langar sits on the floor side by side, shoulder to shoulder. That was the whole purpose of Langar, to bring everybody down to the same level, which of course reflects the basic tenet of Sikh. We are all equals under God. But the Indian state's legal architecture now forces these marginalized communities into a bit of a trap. In other words, if you stay as a lowest caste, if you retain your caste label to access your basic statutory protections, or you can exercise your personal freedom of conscience and forfeit all that if you want to become a Christian or a Muslim. Again, the state actually is using social welfare benefits as a weapon of religious coercion and population control. It's stopping, particularly scheduled castes, from converting to Christianity or Islam, whatever. It's lawfare, again, by the back door. And this institutional control extends directly into economic governance as well. The Modi administration does, of course, try to project this image of a modern, spacefaring global superpower on the international stage. It has a space program. And again, I shake my head quite often in shock at this. India landed on the South Pole of the moon. I think it's only one of 2 nations who have ever done this. Well done to India. But the ground reality across rural India stands in stark contrast. Because, of course, much of rural India reveals widespread poverty and systemic dependency. So thank you to our commenter. It's half the price of NASA too. It is indeed. Absolutely it is. It's cheap as chips. But to be honest, I don't think I'd want to hitch a ride on an Indian space rocket. I'd rather probably rely on a NASA one. But anyway, that's a different story. But anyway, thank you to the commenter who originally brought this to my attention about ration cards in Bihar. So yeah, it's true. And I have to admit, I didn't know that people in India relied on ration cards to eat, to survive. I bet 99% of people out in the West have absolutely no idea that tens of millions of Indians are issued ration cards just to eat. It's a shock, I have to say. When you see India with its modern, incredible cities, Mumbai and what have you, New Delhi, space programs, Modi shaking hands around the world, and yet tens of millions of his citizens are literally surviving through ration cards. In Bihar, specifically, authorities have now been forced to issue millions of new public distribution ration cards, bringing the total population dependent on state food grains to huge levels. So, for a nation that regularly boasts about its space program, its billion-dollar high-tech infrastructure, but the reality that tens of millions of its citizens require monthly state grain rations to avoid starvation exposes a fragile economic foundation. And this does, again, come back to something we talk about, sadly, on an all too regular basis. India's economy is smoke and mirrors. This disparity, it's not accidental. It is the direct outcome of state-sponsored economic policy. So the Caravan, again, well done to the Caravan for reporting on this, but it's not just the Caravan. It's actually quite a common story. And I've talked actually at length about this, but the Caravan specifically recently came out with this article. They documented how the central government and the Nitish Kumar administration in Bihar have prioritized corporate conglomerates like Adani Power, there's a name you'll be familiar with, over the immediate survival of local populations. It's the billionaire oligarchs. So in Bihar's Bhagalpur district, a place called Pirpainti, if I pronounce that correctly, the government facilitated Mr. Adani's power company called Adani Power. Modi's government has facilitated acquisition of land for a massive thermal power plant. And there he is, the man himself. So local villagers, they're facing displacement. They're being kicked off their land. There's going to be environmental degradation, pollution, extreme poverty, of course, which will follow. State machinery, regulatory exemptions, and public land grants are then funneled toward Modi's mates, his billionaire mates, through their corporate interests. So local residents trying to raise environmental or even simple economic concerns are just finding themselves instead facing the police, security agencies. Again, it's this familiar pattern of state intimidation used to protect these oligarchs and their money. In other words, you try and protest against this, you come up against the state machinery and its sharp edge, pellet guns, and now AK-47s. So the contrast in India, just as I said, just cannot be starker. You've got a spacefaring state that claims global economic dominance, but relies on mass food rations to keep its citizens alive, whilst granting huge, wealthy monopolies to political allies. This is the wealth gap that is absolutely appalling in India. We see it all too often. Let's leave India for now. Let's jump back to here in the UK. And for those of you who've been paying attention, we have a new Prime Minister. This guy, I mean, where to begin? I'm sort of taking a deep breath thinking, where on earth do I begin with this guy? Because, well, you thought Starmer was bad. Anyway, yes, indeed. In the halls of Westminster, here in the UK, in London, this guy, Andy Burnham, he swept into power in the most undemocratic way that is possible in a so-called democracy. I mean, it's not quite I wouldn't quite say it was a military coup, but it certainly has been described as, hello, stay safe, new PM, hello. Yeah, it has been described as a democratic coup, but the word democratic has been said slightly sarcastically. Essentially, this guy swept into power with absolutely no democratic mandate, which has raised a lot of concerns here in the UK. And of course, he's done this reshuffle, which means he's appointed new ministers here in the UK. And his reshuffle itself has actually sent ripples through the British political landscape. A lot of people really not happy with what's going on from all parties, actually. And of course, behind those official headlines celebrating increased ethnic diversity across his new ranks, there's a lot more sort of complex realities going on, particularly when it comes to diaspora influence. This is why I actually want to talk about this, because there are new appointees which might be of interest to our Sikh communities. And it does, of course, have an impact, an influence on not just party discipline, but of course the future of the Sikh community here in the UK. It will have a direct impact. So his new appointments feature a notable realignment of Indian origin Labour parliamentarians. Here you go. That's a load of pretty faces. Let me rush. I'll run through them so you know who they are. Kanishka Narayan, top left. He's the MP for Vale of Glamorgan in Wales. He's been elevated into government as the Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence, no less. And that bridges the Cabinet Office and the Department of Business. So joining the front bench alongside him also are two female Sikh MPs elected in that last election we had back in July last year. They are Satvir Kaur. She's the MP for Southampton Test down in the south, on the south coast. And she takes up dual roles as Minister for Equalities and Parliamentary Undersecretary at the Home Office. And there she is, Harpreet Upal. She's the MP for Huddersfield up in Yorkshire, appointed as an Assistant Government Whip. That means she is responsible for making sure that all the party members vote as they're supposed to vote. Well, not literally, but metaphorically with a whip. That's why she's called a whip. And in the Foreign Office, Sri Lankan Heritage Hindu MP Uma Kumaran. She's been named Parliamentary Undersecretary. So they are the new appointees to the front bench, as it's called, basically the front bench ministers. Now, government press releases highlight that this front bench now includes two Hindus and two Sikh ministers. But political analysts point to an interesting shift in diaspora influence, and most significantly, and very sadly, I have to say, Preet Kaur Gill. She's Britain's first female Sikh MP, and she's actually been a very prominent, outspoken voice on Panthic civil rights. She's been returned to the backbenches. That means basically she's moved back, literally, from being a frontline minister back to just an ordinary MP. And I like Preet Kaur Gill. I've met her and I've even shaken her hands. And if you look very closely, there is an award which I was presented just on the shelf there. The Sikh Network All-Party Parliamentary Group for British Sikhs, Sri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Gurpurb Special Contribution and Recognition Award 2024 to myself and Satluj TV. And I was presented that in the British Parliament by Preet Kaur Gill, bless her. She's a lovely lady, and I have to say, it's very sad to see her return to the backbenches because she's done some great work. And also, return to the backbenches is former Indo-Pacific Minister Seema Malhotra. Now, both of those two ladies were actually close allies of our former Prime Minister, Surendra Starmer. And regular viewers know full well I'm no fan of Surendra Starmer. But ultimately, their removal from the front line actually reflects this sort of wider clearing out of Starmer loyalists by the new Prime Minister, Burnham. Yes, as you say, stay safe. These ladies did listen to the Sikh community, and Preet particularly, as I say. She did represent the community very strongly, which again is very sad that she's gone. And her exit from the government ranks really does represent a very substantial loss, because during her time, on both actually the front and back benches, she maintained a consistent track record of raising critical and uncomfortable issues before ministers. She was a big supporter, I believe or understand, of that independent judicial inquiry into the 1984 Operation Blue Star assault that, of course, her party promised before they were elected and still haven't delivered. She actually has advocated behind the scenes, I understand, quite again strongly for Jaggi on behalf of Jagtar Singh Johal. And she has actually been advocating quite loudly over transnational oppression of British Sikhs and, of course, Khalistanis here on British soil. So her sad departure raises, I have to say, a bit of a pressing question for the Sikh community here in the UK. Will these newly elevated Sikh frontbenchers step into the role that Preet actually played very powerfully? Or are they just going to be, once again, party loyalists who will just conveniently forget about the community they supposedly represent and just toe the party line, as it's called? So I just want to take a quick examination of the track records of these new girls and this gentleman, ladies, because actually there is a bit of a contrast in their backgrounds and political priorities. Now, Harpreet Upal, her political origin is actually deeply tied into the Labour Party's machine itself. She's a former councillor in Yorkshire, Kirklees. She worked directly on Andy Burnham's Manchester mayoral campaign back in 2017. So she's a mate of Andy Burnham. That's basically why, obviously, she's been raised to ministerial level. And her appointment as assistant whip means her explicit primary duty is, as I said, is just ensure that she enforces strict party discipline, basically making sure that the backbenchers vote as they're supposed to vote, rather than challenging the government on anything, particularly foreign affairs or, of course, diaspora human rights. In other words, when Burnham comes under pressure from India, he will, of course, buckle like Starmer did, and, of course, Cameron and Johnson before them. And the whip will then go around the backbenchers and say, you will not stand up for the Sikh community. You will vote as Andy Burnham tells you to vote. In other words, for Indian interests. That, sadly, is a likely event. And Satvir Kaur, similarly, she's a former leader of a city council in Southampton. She does bring a lot of municipal city management experience to her role, covering things like equalities, safeguarding, violence against women, etc., which actually is great. It's actually nice to have somebody like that in the role. But sadly, throughout her rise up through Labour politics, she's largely steered clear of any contentious foreign policy debates. So her track record when it comes to foreign policy debates, or actually, as it turns out, any panthic rights advocacy, she's always strictly aligned with party lines. In other words, she clearly doesn't have her own principles. She will just vote as she's instructed to vote by the whip, in turn, obviously, aligning with Burnham. So this shift in Sikh parliamentary advocacy actually comes really at not a great time. And it is, of course, a moment of intense organised activity by pro-Delhi lobby groups, the RSS specifically, who we do know are operating in British political circles. Bob Blackman, Conservative MP, another mouthpiece for Hindutva. So we do know Hindutva and RSS are doing their absolute best to ensure they've got their grips and their claws into British politics, as indeed they do in Canada and North America, in the US. So, and the appointment of Uma Kumaran to the Foreign Office, this is significant because it comes as right-wing Hindutva organisations are really stepping up their outreach into decision makers like her. Now, for years, groups aligned with the BJP have obviously worked tirelessly to try and reframe British Sikhs, and particularly the Khalistan element of our Sikh community, as extremists, as terrorists, and therefore to be suppressed by our security agencies and our police forces. That, of course, is deeply concerning. As you rightly say, Kamke, the Hindutva always trying to tarnish the image of Sikhs. So sadly, we might have a problem. Because without seasoned, independent parliamentarians sitting in these important positions, willing to push back against that pressure coming from India, of course, then there is this nervousness that we're all now feeling that British foreign policy will start to prioritise yet again commercial trade objectives over the protection of Sikh dissidents, over transnational oppression, and of course, historical justice, 1984. So the challenge really facing the British Sikh community under this Burnham ministry is very clear. We've got an uphill battle now. Community leaders and grassroots organisations really are going to have to hold these new front benchers to account, ensure that these ladies and that gentleman don't simply serve as managers of party discipline, but they've got to do their job. They've got to represent those who elected them. We'll see. I hope I'm not in this seat in a few months' time reporting again of further betrayals by our Sikh MPs, because how often have I sadly had to highlight how our Sikh MPs have fundamentally failed in their basic job. Anyway, let's move on. I'm running out of time now. Quickly, as always, I always run out of time. It's going to be another long show, I think. I want to look at just quickly the bigger picture, the global geopolitics, because actually there's been quite a bit going on. This is, in fact, I'll play you a video. Let me just play you a video in the background. There you go. This is actually from the US Embassy in Manila, Philippines. Foreign ministers from the Quad security group, that is the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. They all convened for a few days for a high-level ministerial get-together. And US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, alongside the US ambassador to India, this guy Sergio Gore, who's featured quite regularly on the show, and they've released this official video, and it's all very lovely sort of music and very very bombastic, very pro-US, pro-Quad, the usual stuff. Yeah, we've been here before. But it emphasizes the alliance's commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific. And we often talk about the strategic relevance of India, of course, to Western interests. But of course, beneath all those handshakes and staged press conferences, there is still a lot of friction between Western capitals and New Delhi. And Western diplomats are obviously still trying to frame publicly India as a vital counterweight in the region. But behind closed doors, though, Western intelligence agencies are, of course, still acutely aware of India's expanding covert operations. So we've got this problem, on the public front. We shake hands with Narendra Modi, but beneath the surface, our intelligence agencies are deeply concerned about what India is up to on our own soil. So, of course, it remains an ongoing issue. And, of course, things are further complicated. And the diplomatic tension is actually compounded. It's grown even more by what international analysts are actually now describing as a major breakdown in Delhi's foreign policy, particularly when it comes to the Middle East, that key area at the moment, that flashpoint that is actually choking the supply chains of many Western nations. And this, again, it was a Caravan actually put an article together. It was actually earlier this month, but it's relevant to the Quad meeting. They put this analysis together and they detail how the Modi administration's alignment with far-right politics, its Hindutva agenda essentially, it has actually really damaged its historic ties with key Gulf nations. So sacrificing those long-standing relationships essentially for just domestic political narratives, in other words, to try and remain popular at home, India has basically isolated itself even more from even its Middle East allies in vital economic and trade corridors. Again, when I said those supply chains being choked with the Iran situation, all the regional allies of India are actually now starting to isolate India, which means that India is becoming increasingly fragile in that whole hemisphere. Now, New Delhi struggles, of course, to manage its diplomatic narrative certainly on the public stage, and civil rights activists across the diaspora are, of course, aggressively pulling back that curtain on what India's up to on the world stage. And in the US, Peter Friedrich, I just want to quickly just feature Peter Friedrich, bless him. He does appear again quite regularly on the show. He's been doing some superb work in the US along these lines, just to highlight what India is up to. And of course, by India, specifically the RSS. And he's actually launched a series of high-impact public exposés targeting the RSS and Hindu influence within American political institutions. And he's spoken a lot publicly. He's been out there really spreading the message. I'm going to do more on Peter's activities. Maybe in tomorrow's show, actually, I'll do a separate piece on Peter's work. Again, as I understand, he's not aligned with the Khalistan movement, which is fine. That's not a problem. Of course, he's more focused on just the RSS and the evils of the RSS, which of course aligns very much with what we talk about. But I will do a specific piece on Peter probably tomorrow, so hold that thought. But just as I wrap up the news, I do want to remind you guys. Oh, there you go. There's another. Here you go. Actually, first time I've really mentioned it in detail. Yes, 16th of August, Indianapolis. Be there or be square, as we say. Get to Indianapolis. If you are a Sikh in anywhere near Indianapolis in Indiana, make sure you get there to vote. Your whole family, take everybody you know who is a Sikh, get there, get voting. There's been some fantastic car rallies, loads of videos on social media. Here's just one example. I think Sikhs for Justice posted this one up, but there's loads of examples. These car rallies are all over the US at the moment. They're fantastic. Hundreds and hundreds of cars, these lines, miles of cars flying the wonderful Khalistan flag. They're always so wonderful to see. So join in, get a Khalistan flag, get in your car if you've got one. If you're in the US, no, do it in the UK. Get in your car in the UK. I still haven't seen a car rally here in the UK. Maybe we need one around London, actually. Maybe we should start one. But anyway. And finally, just to quickly wrap up things, just a reminder. Don't forget, I know a few of you have bought your tickets. Well done to you guys who bought tickets. But don't forget, 15th of August, I do have this is the official advert, promo, whatever you want to call it, for Khalistan Football Association, because I've got issues with the sound. I can't play the sound. But if you can imagine motivating sound, emotional music, and a great voiceover with a very deep, manly voice saying, Khalistan, be there, be at the match. Just to remind you guys, of course, 15th of August, make sure you guys get there to show your faces. Don't forget, down in the comments below, in the description below, there is a link to buy your kit. You can buy the Khalistan kit, including the jersey, the shorts, the socks, everything. Turn up in your Khalistan Football Association kit. It'd be great to see you, all you guys, wearing your strips, supporting the team. Make sure you're there. And of course, you guys in the US, don't forget Indianapolis. Absolutely essential that you are there. Right, on that note, need to very quickly zip across to our comments because, gosh, we've only got 8 minutes left. Yes, indeed, it's going to be another long show again. So I'm going to zip through. We've got a lot of comments to go through on this one. These comments came after my podcast with Dr. Grayle last week, which again was an interesting one about partition and what led up to partition. It was fascinating, actually. Anyway, Basant kicks us off. The social indicators will drop below the Punjab-Pakistan once this distant dream becomes true. I assume you're talking about Khalistan with that one. TC drops in. It is a round of balkanization. Yes, we did talk in this podcast a lot about India is likely in the foreseeable future to break up. It is inevitable. Khalistan's in the band, absolutely, TC. Thank you for that. Majar Mafia. Sadly, did come in with loads of Punjabis, but I think he does feature later on with actually a non-Punjabi. So Maja Mafia, thank you for your comments, but one has actually appeared because it is in English. Anyway, right, Danny, for those of you who watched yesterday's show, Danny featured a lot in the comments, and he likewise, and I'm not going to read out those comments because thank you, Danny, for all your contributions. You've obviously put a lot of effort into your discussion, so much appreciated. Thank you for all that. Essentially, clearly you are, I assume you're a Pakistani Muslim. That is my guess from what you've been saying. But your comments basically are all about, as I think I iterated yesterday in yesterday's show, you're standing up for the nation of Pakistan, but you're quite disparaging of the Sikhs and the whole Khalistan movement, basically dismissing it, saying, no, you've gone about it all wrong. Well, I'm not going to reiterate what I said yesterday, but let's agree to disagree. But thank you, Danny, anyway. What I would say, stay safe. I hope you're still online, stay safe. This specific conversation did actually sink into a little bit of a name-calling session. So I did chuckle, but all I would say is please keep it polite. Stay safe. I think you were rather provoked into dipping into the into the unpalatable comments. So just be a little bit careful about that. In other words, keep our conversations, our debates polite and courteous and respectful. So, but anyway, thank you. Stay safe. This was an interesting one. And again, we don't have much time to go into detail, but basically, this is all about, again, it's a philosophical question that we do talk about a lot, which is, of course, the diaspora. In India, Sikhs are hard done by. Of course you are. And many Sikhs, as a result, flee to the diaspora. But of course, don't forget, in the diaspora, you're still not, how do I say this correctly? I'm trying to describe it in the right way. You're welcomed, obviously, but ultimately, I was going to say you're not British. Of course you're British. You know the point, and Stay Safe makes the point. Basically, ultimately, you belong in Khalistan, is really what it all boils down to. Sikhs belong in their own sovereign nation. When you're here in the West, obviously you're welcome, you build successful, wonderful lives, but ultimately your hearts and your soul belong in Khalistan. And likewise in Punjab. That's where you belong. So thank you for the point. Harmeet Singh. This was details that actually we need to research. I don't know if this is true, but it did question the whole premise of what we discussed. And particularly, we referred to a massacre that preceded those awful times of partition. It was the Rawalpindi massacre. But Harmeet Singh says actually it was the Akali leaders who first kicked things off, and then a debate sort of follows. I don't know if that is true. All I do know is that leading up to partition, it was actually Dr. Ambedkar who designed the line of partition, ultimately that then the British then adopted. But who actually kicked off the violence? It's debatable. And at the end of the day, it almost doesn't matter. The fact is the violence happened and it was unforgivable. Nirmal Singh, down in Australia. Thank you, Nirmal, for joining us as you regularly do. Vaheguru has showed us rogues and untrustworthy people can take advantage of situations to get power. And this actually leads into a comment that comes shortly. One of the weaknesses, and it's a tragic weakness of the Sikh community, is they're too trusting. And I say that in the most sort of benign sort of way I can say it, because by default, and it's a noble thing, but it means that anybody evil with evil intent can then easily take advantage of a Sikh. They take advantage of their trusting nature. And a Sikh will trust by default until proven otherwise, which means that people forever take advantage of Sikhs. And that, sadly, in this ruthless world, is why Sikhs have suffered so much. Sikhs are too genuine. There you go. Sikhs are too genuine and too trusting. But Nehru and Gandhi were the biggest rogues because they wanted their families to be in power forever. It was the Brahmins taking control. Thank you. Something in Punjabi 6334. You know who you are. History of Indian government against Sikh community. That's the way we want to make Khalistan. Indeed, it is. And Stay Safe. I'm not totally sure that this person will end up in Critics Corner, but I know somebody who. Oh yes, Danny. Yes, Danny. Danny is likely to end up in Critics Corner, and here he is. And I'm not even just going to go through that lot. Majid Mafia appears again, sadly. Oh, Grandmaster Tiger Fist. What this? Now this one almost made Critics Corner. White man on Jatwadi paycheck, and Stay Safe does jump to my defense by saying, "Have your Kellogg's Frosties." Well. You can say that to the Godi media. They're on the Godi paycheck. Ultimately, all news outlets have their agenda. My agenda is to bring you the truth. If I'm paid for it, so be it. But ultimately, I'm sitting here passionately saying what I say. I mean what I say. It's not because I get some paycheck. It'd be wonderful if I was financed, for example, by the ISI, the Pakistan intelligence, as is often the case. Even the Chinese, please do send me a check. China or Pakistan, I'd be delighted. Ultimately, I sit here because I care about what I talk about, because I am genuinely motivated about what I talk about. So you can reduce it into some sort of mercenary motives that you think I have. Sadly not. I wouldn't be here doing what I do and speaking so passionately if it was because I'm on the Jatwadi paycheck. It's sad if you believe that. Good information. Thank you for that. Stay Safe jumps in again. Oh, yes, I used a metaphor. Again, we don't have time to go into detail about it. But I did, watch the podcast. I did use a metaphor about the dynamics of the Hindu community and the Muslim community, who were the two big sticks during partition. And in the middle was this tiny group of Sikhs with the smaller stick. And of course, who was going to win in that battle? It was the Hindus and the Muslims. That's why they got Pakistan and India, and the Sikhs essentially lost out tragically. So, but as I said, the metaphor I used was it will always follow the path of least resistance, like water down a mountainside. It will always follow the path of least resistance, the easiest thing. So the message to the Khalistan movement that I said in the podcast was make sure you get a pre-packaged solution. So when India breaks up, which it will do very shortly, I've no doubt, that this can be put on the table saying, here's an easy solution, Khalistan, to solve all the problems. Avatar Dylan, yes, again, we talk about this trust. Trust is why anybody loses anything. This actually, and again, we don't have time to go in detail about it, but this raises that same point. Sikhs are actually too trusting. Now, it's not a fault. It's a weakness. But it's a good weakness. It's an honorable weakness. But it does mean that those who are ruthless and nasty in the world can take advantage, which is deeply sad. Jagdev Singh, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Khalistan Zindabad. And Majah Mafia, thank you, Majah Mafia. You actually speak in English at last, which is nice to feature in the comments column. Shout the victory slogan. Be blessed. May you receive the boons you desire. May this be pleasing to the lotus feet of all the martyr Singhs and Singhnis of the past and present. Sat Sri Akal. Khalistan Zindabad. Khalistan Zindabad. Khalistan Zindabad. What a fabulous comment. Thank you. It's a really lovely comment. I'm really glad you did it in English. I'm not going to go back on Danny's comment again. And 6334 is back with the same sentiments. Khalistan Zindabad. And likewise in Punjabi, some Sat Sri Akals, cross Kirpans, stuffed in muffins with the ice cream cones as usual. Love heart from Agam. Thank you, Agam. Love back to you. And the final comment of the show goes to, originally it goes Khalistan Zindabad, Murgi Vlogs Rinku, but ultimately Voice of Punjab. Khalistan Zindabad, and even USA Zindabad. Let's all join in. let's praise everybody. Indeed, that is in fact the end of the show. I'm just going to pop it there. Email is now working. You guys who've emailed me, apologies, they've not come through. So I don't know what's happened to them. I don't know if they've bounced back to you guys. So if you have sent me emails in the last, since at least Friday last week, please resend your emails because they've not come through. Our system is now working. It took a few days to get it up and running. It is running again. Please do message me again, message@satloadtv.com. So please don't forget. Leave your comments below. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know any links to stories that you think I've missed or need to talk about or need to know about. Don't forget, you guys are my people on the ground. You are the researchers just as much as myself for this show. I need you guys feeding me the information, the intelligence, the news, the research, just even snippets, however small. Many of you have been doing, much appreciated. It helps point me in the right directions of where the truth lies, because mainstream, you don't get the truth. So I need you guys. You guys are my army, my personalized journalistic army out there on the ground, all around the world, digging up what we need to know, digging up the truth. That's what we're here for. But that is it for another day. God willing, I will be back tomorrow, live at 5 again, Wednesday afternoon, live at 5 with perspectives. Do keep your comments coming in. Don't forget to comment after the video has been uploaded as well, because I need those comments as well, just as well as your live comments. Much appreciated. Thank you for all you guys who've been watching online. Really, it's really nice to see you guys there. You guys particularly who've stayed the course, who've been here for most of the show. Much appreciated. Nice to see you, B. Singh, Bram Leen Binder, still there. Sat Sri Akal, and love back to you guys as well. Much appreciated. Great to see you guys. Thanks for watching. And God willing, I will catch you guys tomorrow. And fingers crossed, all your comments as well. Right, I need to find the off switch. Have a great night, guys.